thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jill McLay. I'm the Director of Policy Advocacy and Research at the Reese Jones Center for Foster Care Excellence at Children's Health in Dallas, Texas. And Will Spalding is a professor of psychology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And so Will is joining you from Nebraska, and I am joining you from Texas. And we are here today primarily in our roles as co-editors for the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry, which is the Global Alliance for Social Justice, for Behavioral Health and Social Justice official journal that's published by the American Psychological Association. So we're going to talk to you today about writing for publication, both kind of in general terms, but also writing specifically for the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry. So we're trying to kind of meet people where they are. So for some folks, some of the information that we provide may be a little basic, and you've already been through this. And for folks who have never submitted a publication or only submitted one or two, we wanted to make sure that we were covering content that would be useful for everyone. So without further ado, I will start our presentation. So if, Keisha, if you could stop sharing this slide, and then I'll pull up, there we go, and I'll pull up our presentation. And I'm gonna not start at the end. There we go. So we wanted to start off, and I think for those of you who have submitted articles before, you will be able to relate to this. This clip that we wanted to share with you actually comes from David Finkelhor. Dr. Finkelhor is a very big name in child maltreatment research, and he received an award from the Kemp Center several years ago. And in his speech in which he received the award, he gave us a little song that he said, I think, is a good way to education.
Myself in the course of receiving the award, but I'm going to sing a little song that pertains
Before I
to
go
some
any further, can you guys hear that okay? Is it coming through? All right, just making sure. Here we go.
The trials and tribulations of doing the few that pertain to the kind of work that I do. And so some of you, I think, will be able to identify with this. The data's in, the numbers crunched, the manuscript's been sent. Our program lowers child abuse by 93%. The conquest of this ancient scourge at last is imminent. Oh no. Revise and resubmit. Implications. Can you be more definite? Correlations. Does your model really fit? New citations. Can you update them a bit? Revise and resubmit. So we added text, refreshed the refs, controlled for victim's age. We shortened up the abstract so it fit on half a page. Detailed the change in unctuous prose, the critics to assuage. Oh no. Revise and resubmit. Replication, it would surely strengthen it. Explanation for the cases you omit. Punctuation and infinitives you split. Revise and resubmit. So we added 50 subjects, cut the P to .01, displayed in an appendix every case that we had run. Asked Strunk and White to edit it. Wasn't any fun. Oh no. Revise and resubmit. New reviewers, and they don't like it a bit. Misconstruers dealing death by picking nit. Oh, evildoers. Boy, this editor's a twit. Revise and resubmit. Well, we sent it back just yesterday. Revision 53. Our data now are old enough to join AARP. If I die soon, I only hope St. Peter says to me, revise and resubmit.
So for those of you who have submitted before, you may be able to relate to that. And if you haven't, hopefully it prepares you for what the submission process can be like. It is not uncommon to get a revise and resubmit if there is, if the paper is not rejected. And to kind of normalize that, you know, even academics who have been doing this for a long time and who have published quite a bit still experience rejection, still experience revise and resubmit. And so hopefully this kind of normalizes that experience and it helps you not to feel too frustrated if you get such decisions as you're starting out. So now let me see if I can get out of this and go to the next slide. There we go. So we're going to move from that to walking you through writing a journal article. So we have here an attempt to have some plain language explanations of the content of a journal article. You know, academic writing looks quite different than basically any other type of writing, particularly for those of you who are straight out of an undergrad or master's program, and the way you're taught to write papers in that context is very different. For those of you who may have been working for a while and are used to more technical writing or kind of writing briefs, it looks very different also. And so just to kind of demystify some of the sections of the paper and to help you think about how much you should write for each of these sections, and keep in mind this is just guidelines. This isn't hard and fast. Each section should be this word count. But when you're putting together your abstract, basically what you're doing is you're answering the questions of what did I do and what did I find in a nutshell. In your introduction, you're explaining the problem. In the literature review, you're providing your conceptual framework and some background information on how you derived at your question. In the materials and methods section, you're explaining how you examined the problem. In the results section, you're explaining what you found out. And in the discussion, you're talking about what the findings mean. You're putting those findings into context and you're explaining what the implications are of those findings. And then in the reference section, you're including whose work you used, whose work you cited in writing the paper. Sorry, my slides are being really slow to go forward. I'm not quite sure why that is. There we go. Now they're going. All right. So just going to break down each of those sections a little bit. The abstract's purpose is really to summarize the article, to give the reader the opportunity to kind of see what the paper's about, to see what was found, to determine whether or not it's relevant to the work that they're doing. And so when you think about it, the abstract, I usually think about it as, you know, pulling a sentence or two from each section of the paper. So you want to make sure you're including the question that you're investigating or the purpose of your article, which often is included in the introduction section. You want to include the experimental design and methods you used to examine that question, again, from the methods section. And then from the results section, you may have a lot of results. And again, the abstract is usually 150 to 250 words. So you want to talk about the major findings, the key results or trends that you found from your study. And then a very brief summary of your interpretation and conclusion. So what's the takeaway from the study? For the introduction and the literature review, you're really establishing the context of the work that you're describing in your article. So it also, usually at the end, right before you transition into the method section, you want to state the purpose of the work. And it should be such that the introduction, as the reader is going through and reading that introduction, those questions follow logically. You've built the case. It's kind of like telling a story. In your introduction, you're telling the story, and it should all very clearly, it should be clear to the reader that, of course, those would be the questions that you would be asking based on what you have provided, the information that you provided to us in the introduction. It should flow logically from the introduction. And you briefly explain your rationale And then, kind of, again, those kind of plain language words is really, what was I studying? Why is it an important question? You're really establishing that this is something that's in need of studying, that it's not a replication of a finding that's been done a zillion times, but what makes this study unique? What gap is it filling in the literature? Why should the reader care about this study? And then in your materials and methods, you want to make sure that you explain clearly how you carried out your study. And generally speaking, there's 4 pieces to that method section. One is your participants. You describe who or what was involved in the study, the survey, the experiment, how they were selected. And then in your materials section, you want to describe any materials, measures, equipment, stimuli, anything that was used in the experiment. And then you want to explain the design. So describe the type of the experiment that was used, what variables were used, and then finally in your procedure, you explain what you had participants do, how you collected the data, and the order in which the steps occurred. And I'm including in here in this procedure section also the statistical procedure. So how did you analyze the data? That also gets included in the materials and methods. So once you actually collected all the information, what statistical procedures did you use, or what type of qualitative analysis did you use to analyze the data that you pulled? So a couple of tips. Is make sure your method section is written in the past tense, because by definition the experiment that you've done should be in the past tense. And again, make sure you provide enough detail that researchers could replicate your experience. I think that's a really important thing. I think a lot of times we see reviewers ask for more detail on the methods, and so if you think about it as if someone else was going to do the study I'm doing, is there enough information provided in the method section for them to be able to replicate it? And then for the results section, actively present your findings. So emphasizing objectively. This is without interpretation. You're just stating what you found in the experiment. So it should be an orderly and logical sequence using both text and tables or figures. You don't need to write about every bit of information that you gleaned from the study. You can put information into tables and then highlight the really important information and findings in the text. And specifically what you found as it relates to the research questions that you are asking. That should be spelled out in the text. And also, include negative results. I mean, just because you didn't find what you expected to find doesn't mean you don't include those findings. That is learning, that is engagement, that is knowledge in and of itself. So make sure that you state things. If they weren't statistically significant, it's important for your readers to know that. And then the text should guide the reader through your results, really emphasizing those key results to those questions. Make sure when you're reading back through the paper after it's written that the questions that you asked in your introduction, when you stated your research questions, that you provided those results in a clear way in that results section. And then the discussion. This is a really important piece that I think is one of the hardest parts for particularly new people that are new to academic writing. This is the place where you interpret the results. So in the results section, you're just reporting what you found. But in the discussion, this is where you're interpreting the results within the context of what's already known. So remember at the beginning when I was saying when you're writing an introduction, it should be like a story, and that it should be obvious to your reader why you're asking the questions that you are asking. You're continuing that story. And so when you get to the discussion, you're kind of closing the loop for your reader. So you're going back to what you talked about in your introduction, right? You're providing the context. You set up the reason for the question. Now, how do your results advance the field? How do they further what was already known and what you discussed in your introduction? Was it similar to what's been found before? Was it different? Why do you think it was similar? Why do you think it was different? What are some possible explanations? Make sure that you do not simply repeat or rearrange the introduction. This is new, this is different. You're not using all the same citations you used in the introduction. When I say you're going kind of, it's not full circle when you go back to the introduction, but you do think about continuing the story that you started in the introduction. So tell how your study has moved us forward from where you left us at the introduction. And things that the types of things that you might cover in a discussion are whether or not your findings agree with what others have shown, and if not, do they suggest an alternate explanation or perhaps an unforeseen design flaw in your experiment or theirs. Given your conclusions, what is our new understanding of the problem that you investigated and outlined in the introduction? If warranted, what would be the next step in your study? For example, what experiments would you do next? You could also look at what are the implications for practitioners. What are the implications for policy? What are the implications for practice? What are the implications for research? And then this section, the discussion section, should also include limitations to your study. So when you think about the design, the participants, the way that you conducted your study, what are some of the limitations, some things that you couldn't do because of the amount of time you had to administer a survey or the access you had to people, that sort of thing. And then last but not least, I included the conclusion. Not all articles have conclusions, but some journals do ask for conclusions. Usually this is short and sweet. This is usually a single paragraph to remind the reader why the article was written. My example, there was a gap and I filled it. And reiterate your key findings. How did this advance the field? What did you learn? How does it advance the field? Keep it short and sweet. And then quickly, I just wanted to go over, generally speaking, what some of the most common reasons are that a manuscript gets rejected. So sometimes it's because the article isn't a good fit for the aims and scopes of the journal. So make sure, or aims and scope of the journal. So make sure before you submit an article that you read the aims and scope to make sure that the study that you're writing about fits with what that journal publishes. Sometimes the research does not make a sufficiently large contribution to the body of knowledge in a specific discipline. So again, like I was saying before, it's when you are replicating results, say, but it's something that's been done many times, and so it's not really something that contributes a lot to the body, to the knowledge base. The methodology in the study is flawed. Either the sample size is too small for the technique or strategy employed, the measures used lack reliability or validity, or the reliability and validity aren't reported. The qualitative research lacks scientific validity. The writing style is disorganized and the article is not structured properly. I can't overestimate how important the clarity of the writing is. You could have a really great study, but if you can't explain it well to others, and it's not clear why you asked the question, what you did, and what the conclusions are, the odds are it's not going to be accepted for publication. So I'm going to go back. I talked about one of the reasons for rejection being it not fitting with the aims and scope. So let's talk for a quick minute about selecting a journal. You really want to be strategic here. There are a lot of journals out there, and you need to think about where your article is the best fit. Think about who it is you're trying to reach, where the readers that you think need to have this in their hands. What are they reading? And so one thing is to think about, are you looking for a journal that has an international focus, a regional focus, domestic focus? What sort of article are you writing? Is it qualitative or quantitative? Some journals only publish qualitative, some only publish quantitative work, some publish brief reports, some don't, some publish reviews, some don't. Who is your audience? Is it discipline specific? If so, you may want to be looking at the journals that are specific to that discipline. But if you're trying to reach an interdisciplinary audience, then you need to think about a journal that's interdisciplinary in its scope and its reach. What is the journal's ranking? What's its impact factor? And some of that depends on, what you're planning to do in the future or what you're currently doing and how important it is to your university or where you work that you are publishing in journals that have a high impact factor. It's always something to weigh and to push back on, because sometimes impact factor, I won't go into all of that now, but there's a lot of questions about how strong that measure is. And also it may be that the audience that you need to reach with this article doesn't read the journals with the high impact factor, that it's really specific to this group of people who read X journal. And then where were the articles related to my topic published? That can be a helpful starting point. Look at your own references. Where were they published? And then just a last piece of advice is to aim high, but stay grounded. It can be really hard if you think, sometimes it's, well, I don't need to publish this right away. I don't need a publication for my CV right away. So I'm going to try to go for the highest journal I possibly can. But you have to think about the fact that if it's not a good fit for that journal and it gets rejected, and you try it again and it gets rejected, that can be really disheartening. And it slows down the process of getting your research out there. So think about, balance all of those factors when you're making your decision. And then make sure that once you've selected your journal, that you're writing for that specific journal. Like I said, read the aims and scope, read the guide for authors, follow the journal's format. It is not uncommon to submit an article to an APA journal that's written in maybe American Sociological Association style. It isn't unheard of for that article to be immediately returned to you to say, it needs to be submitted in APA style. So just make sure you're using the right format and you're following that guide for the authors, and that you adhere to the page limits if there are page limits for that journal. And make sure that your article makes a contribution to the literature before you write. You should be able to answer these questions. What is the message of the paper? What's the message I'm trying to convey? What is the new result or new contribution that I'm describing, that I'm offering? And what is it that you want to convince people of? Have you done it in this article? And discuss it with others. Talk with other people about what you wrote, about what you found. Don't be afraid to send your article to other people and ask them to review it before you submit and give you feedback. Again, make sure you follow the recommended structure in the guide to authors. Avoid using jargon, especially if you're into an interdisciplinary journal. Try to avoid wordiness, be clear, be concise, use an active voice, and make sure that you're telling that story, that your ideas follow logically, and that there's clear transitions between thoughts and ideas. And last but not least for me, the other stuff. Editors really like it when you recommend reviewers. There's always a place. Some journals require it. You have to say, here's people I would suggest to review my work. Some have it as optional. But it's a good idea to help the editors by pointing out, 2, 3, 4 people who are experts in what you're writing about and who you think would be good to review your article. Don't forget to include a cover letter, and then read lots of journal articles. I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I can give. The best way to figure out how to write for publication and how to write to the specific journal you want to publish in is to read in that journal. Sorry, I did have one more thing before I turn it over to Will. Just kind of unveiling the wizard behind the curtain. What happens once you submit your article? Sorry, this is really blurry. It didn't look like that before I enlarged the screen. Basically, once you submit your article for review, the editor determines if the manuscript is suitable for review, and sometimes they consult with senior editors or if there's co-editors with their other editor in making that determination. And then they'll either reject the manuscript without external review, or they'll send the manuscript to reviewers. The reviewers have time to review, and then they submit their reviews, and then they make their recommendations. The editor looks at the manuscript and the recommendations that were made by the reviewers. And then at that point, the editor either accepts the manuscript, which I can say is very, 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 very rare. I think maybe once or twice I've seen a manuscript that got accepted right off the bat. See the video I showed you at the beginning of this session. The editor will recommend revisions and send it to the author to revise and resubmit. Or the editor will reject the manuscript, and then you'll, as the author, receive that rejection letter with the reviewer's feedback. All right, I am going to now turn it over to Will to talk specifically about our journal.
Yeah, Jill has been talking about submitting to journals in general. And of course, what we want you to do is submit to AJO, not just any journal. And so I'm going to show you some more specific stuff about our journal in order to stimulate you to think about sending us your work. First, we thought a little bit of backstory on the journal itself would be helpful, just to give you an idea of why the stuff that is important to us is important to us. First, the most frequently asked question about the Journal of Orthopsychiatry is, what the heck is orthopsychiatry? So let me explain that. The prefix ortho comes from a Greek meaning to straighten, or to make straight, or to be straight, as in other ortho words in our language, like orthopedia. Orthopedics, of course, is the medical specialty specializing in bones. Why ortho straight for there? Orthopedia meaning straightened children. Well, in the 19th century, when this terminology evolved, the main medical problem with pediatrics was rickets, a nutritional disorder that causes bones to be not straight. And so orthopedia evolved into the term for bone surgery independent of pediatrics. Another example is orthodontia, getting braces on your teeth to straighten your teeth. There's a more recent connotation for ortho, meaning prevention, or referring to prevention, or taking a preventative approach to health. And as it happens, the idea of prevention resonates heavily with the philosophical origins of the journal and the organization that first published the journal. One thing that it's fun to debate amongst us who derive amusement from such things, does orthopsychiatry mean to straighten out psychiatry, or to straighten out mental illness? And that continues to be a subject of debate, because both deserve a lot of straightening out. Actually, in practice, it means both. Scientific rigor to straighten out psychiatry, and an orientation to social reform and social justice to speak to all of us, and not just the mental health disciplines. The origins of our organization go back arguably to the first third or so of the 20th century, where there was a very strong movement for social reform pertinent to mental health by a community of people that were unhappy with both the psychoanalytic and the biomedical paradigms that were dominating psychopathology and mental health at that time. And they envisioned a third force that would utilize much more of the newly evolving social sciences, especially sociology and social psychology. And that organization is associated with some of the big names that we now remember in mental health. Clifford Beers, who started the mental hygiene movement. Adolf Meyer, who was a psychiatrist, but he's credited for inventing the discipline of social work. And they collaborated with William James, interestingly, who is one of the founding figures of American psychology. And that group developed the ideas that we today recognize as the public health approach to mental health sciences and also policy and practice. And that movement actually dominated American mental health policy through the 1960s and is responsible for the world that we see to a great extent. It changed a lot in the late 60s when there was a decided political change in America from a progressive to a more conservative point of view. And so the world that we see today is kind of the interaction of those kinds of different forces. So these guys back in the 1920s organized themselves. They were mostly psychiatrists at that time. Social work and psychology and other professions didn't even exist yet. And they call themselves the American Ortho-Psychiatric Association. It was organized in 1924, and 6 years later they started publishing their own journal, which was the American Journal of Ortho-Psychiatry, which was originally conceived to be a combination of practice-oriented stuff and scientifically oriented stuff and policy-oriented stuff right from the start. So you see there in the very first issue of this journal in 1930, most of the issue consisted of this symposium on, interesting title, Treatment of Behavior and Personality Problems in Children. And there are some scattered additional research articles on identical twins. There was a lot of identical twins research going on during that period. There was one on psychological testing, including things about the Rorschach inkblot test and various kinds of block design tests. And the psychologists in our group will note that those block design tests were very central to the much later evolution of our modern day neuropsychological and intelligence tests. So that was kind of the mentality of the time there in the early days that led to this journal. And the journal dates back continuously. We've published every year since 1930. And then in more recent times, the American Ortho-Psychiatry Association became the Global Alliance for Behavioral Health and Social Justice. That was in 2016. A large reason for that was, people don't understand what ortho means, but also we're no longer an American organization exclusively. We've taken on global dimensions, and the primacy of social policy and reform was sustained. So this was thought to be a much better name for the organization, more descriptive as to its purpose and activity. Nevertheless, we did not change the name of the journal. I suppose there are many reasons for that. A main one is name recognition. And as a matter of fact, when the American Psychological Association became the publisher of the journal, there was a contract stipulation that the name of the journal would remain as it was. So the more recent development of the journal itself has resulted now in two major divisions, one of which we're going to call here the Scientific Journal Division, because it looks exactly like a scientific journal, and indeed that's what it is. And that part publishes peer-reviewed research reports and also reviews under pretty standard criteria for behavioral science publications, largely those that Jill was describing in the first part of the talk here. And then there's the Social Innovation Division, which, well, there are a lot of roots to this. The late Gary Melton was a central figure in conceptualizing what kind of literature this would be. He often compared the idea to the kinds of articles that you might see in the Atlantic, for example. And that's the ideal to which we strive. This is a more magazine format, so it does not adhere to the dry and highly referenced scientific journal article, but its purpose is to describe what people are actually doing out there in the real world to forward the cause of social reform and to bring not only social justice, but quality behavioral health services to everywhere and to everyone who needs it. That's published, by the way, as part of the, along with the issue that contains the journal articles. And Jill's main gig here is to be the editor of Social Innovations. So since this is a rather unconventional format, we always suggest that if you have ideas that you think may be suitable for Social Innovations, that you contact Jill and talk about it. So here are some numbers that are sort of interesting that give you a general idea of where the journal stands with regard to some of the things that Jill was talking about. First up there, you'll see the impact factor under metrics. That's a somewhat controversial index, as you might have gathered. And as Jill was saying, it means different things in different contexts. Our citation index is 1.7, which reflects the probability that articles published in the journal at any given time will be cited in another scientific article over the next year. 1.8, to round it out, is somewhat above the median of all of the APA journals. It's not a normal distribution. There's a big cluster at the low end. And so we're pretty much toward the front of the middle of the pack, so to speak, in terms of that particular number. What's more important to us is the 5-year impact. And this is a number that you can interpret more conceptually in comparison to the impact factor. As you might think, what that means is it's the impact factor not over the next year, but over the next 5 years. And what happens is that scientific journals, especially in the hard sciences, where the impact factor over the first year is very high, the 5-year impact factor often falls off precipitously because of the rapidity with which the science moves. In January, a finding might be exciting to a lot of people in chemistry and biology and medicine, and by July, it's passé. And so that impact factor drops off quickly. For our area, where we're talking about developments in social policy over longer periods of time, it's the cumulative effect of our publications that's important to us. We think our publications are more likely than publications in the average journal to have a directional impact on where the science and the disciplines are going. And so we're very happy that our 5-year impact is quite high, which we interpret it to mean that the long-term impact of this journal is fairly significant compared to the shorter-term impacts of other publications. The ranking is very difficult for us. Journals are ranked discipline by discipline, and you sort of get to choose the discipline with which you want to be ranked. But we're an interdisciplinary journal, and that's a very difficult category to be compared in. By default, for reasons we don't completely fathom, APA has been putting AJO in the social work category, where we're in the top quarter pretty consistently, and as you can see, the number kind of fluctuates around, going from number 14 out of 42 journals in 2017 to number 5 out of 43 journals in 2018 to number 8 out of 44 journals in 19. So it's interesting to us, but the main conclusion we take from this is that we would like to be put in a more appropriate category, but nobody seems to know what category that might be. The table beneath that just shows you some standard ways in which the efficiency of the editorial process of a journal is measured, including things like the time it takes from submission to editorial decisions to actual publication. And in that regard, we pretty much fall right in the average domain, especially for more traditional scientific journals. Those numbers are getting kind of funny and fluctuate a lot over the past few years as we see increasing numbers of these rapid turnaround and pay-as-you-go journals that do exactly that. If you pay to get your stuff published, you can get it out pretty quickly. That's much more important, I think, in the biomedical sciences, where researchers often include publication costs in their research grants. And as I was saying before, results can become quickly passé. So it's important to get them out really quick so that you can influence other researchers. So the point of most of this stuff is that the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry has a long-term impact, and the stuff that we choose to publish tends to have that kind of long-term impact, perhaps at the cost of shorter-term rapid impact. So if you're in an academic department that really puts a lot of unreflective value on the impact factor itself, then you should weigh that, as Jill was saying, with respect to whether you can afford to submit to a lower impact journal. On the other hand, if you're in a department that values the long-term influence of submissions on broad swaths of the area, then, or if you're in a department of social work that values these relative rankings, then AJO may be much more the journal for you. This is a reiteration of those reasons for rejections. This is in particular desk rejections, which means you don't even send it out to review. The editor makes a decision that, nah, for one reason or another, we're not going to review this, and it's not ready for prime time. And what you'll see by these percentages is there's quite a common, most common reason for desk rejections, which here it says no policy with referral. And 59% of our desk rejections meet that criteria. What that means is that we have identified a particular other kind of outlet short of AJO and less oriented especially to social policy, and we're suggesting to the authors that they submit in one of those journals. That's what we mean here by with referral. So the most common example of that is we'll receive a very well-designed and executed clinical outcome trial of a particular new treatment technique. But there are some controversies to it that need to be worked out methodologically. And because of that, it'll be a while before this kind of result really can be expected in having to have an impact on social policy. So typically the editor will say to the authors, this isn't suitable because it doesn't really address social policy issues specifically enough, but what you really ought to do is submit it to another journal that's more focused on this particular type of treatment or this particular type of disorder. So if it's on trauma, for example, and it's exploring a new approach to trauma, everybody knows that trauma has really important implications down the road for social policy. But there are a lot of vicissitudes in the treatment of trauma, and those need to be worked out in journals that are more specifically focused on treatment of trauma. Sometimes we get papers that don't really speak enough to social policy, and we're kind of flummoxed as to where we would send them. So that's an additional 14% where we reject the submission because there's not enough implication for policy, but we can't really come up with a good referral to the author. That next number, the next highest number, 21%, is the one that Jill was describing as just, it's not coherent enough, it's not well written enough. There are obvious flaws that even an editor like myself can detect. I don't have to ask an expert in the area to tell me that it's a flawed design. And so we get a number of submissions that meet that criterion. And it's actually a rather small percentage of submissions that we say, nah, the topic is just, or the format is different, just not suitable for this journal. So, for example, once we got a submission that was totally written as a poem, and we didn't send that out for review because we don't publish poetry. And finally, there's this kind of odd situation where it's in the ballpark in terms of topical interest, but there are so many problems with it. We'd really like to see a new version of it, but to address all of the problems in the paper to make it suitable for publication would be a lot like jacking up the radiator cap of your car and driving a new car under it. So in those situations, we'll just say, the topic is good, but there's so many problems with the paper, you might as well we're going to reject it because we want you to start over, and you can resubmit it later as a new publication. Normally, we do not consider papers that are basically resubmissions of papers that were previously rejected. But in rare circumstances, because of the topic or the timeliness, we will ask authors just to start over. But that's a fairly rare instance. This is from the journal's website, and it's just our carefully wordsmith explanation of what the journal is about and what we're looking for. I won't read it to you. Let me use it as motivation for you to go to the journal website, and many of your questions may be answered by this kind of language. I will point out that this description does emphasize social policy, but it also emphasizes the need for scientific findings that inform policy. It's a double barrel kind of deal. So this is a list of what's hot, just in terms of submissions that we get, and it's in no particular order, but it's our impression of who's doing what in the world out there that is submitting eventually to this journal. So one of the main things is people documenting health disparities. We had a lot of submissions on that. Findings that one or another minority group or otherwise disenfranchised population doesn't have the health that others have, and there's a continuing need for the documentation of that. We're getting to a point where, for some populations, the health disparities are so well known that it's a little difficult to do studies that add new information to that. On the other hand, all the time, we discover new underserved populations, especially globally, where you've got refugee populations and rural populations in the pre-industrial countries. So the discovery of new populations with health disparities is quite an active process in our journal. Another big one is modeling. Not fashion modeling, but mathematical modeling. And that is attributable, I think, to two recent developments. One is the existence of these huge data banks where you've got more data than you could possibly analyze for one kind of study. And the whole idea of the research is to amass this data for later analysis, sometimes called data mining. And kind of concomitant with that, there's been this explosion of very sophisticated mathematical analytic techniques to tease out what all of the causal pathways and mediating relationships and moderating relationships might be in those databases. And we get a lot of that stuff. And provided that the database from which it's derived is not too old, oftentimes those kinds of analysis really do contribute significantly to our understanding of very complex processes like how social welfare services are delivered, for example. We have an interesting tradition of publishing stuff on what happens in environmental conditions, natural disasters, among other things, but more obviously war and immigration and its causes and poverty, especially with vulnerable populations. Interestingly, there's a lot of intersectionality with that stuff, as you may have noticed. For example, we've had several submissions of late on the effects and the public response to hurricanes and floods. And we're especially interested because the data consistently shows that disadvantaged populations are differentially impacted by natural disasters. So we're increasingly interested in this kind of work. We like to see studies of interventions to reduce health disparities. We don't see nearly enough of those because I think of the state of the art, and you have to so thoroughly document the existence of the disparity. But we're starting to see stuff now on public policy strategies for reducing health disparities, and we're really interested in those. Similarly, we're really interested in studies that take a known evidence-based treatment, social skills training, cognitive behavioral therapy, you name it, taking one that's already well developed, but based on usually American majority populations, and making adaptations in those modalities in order to specifically use them in different populations. So we've published some stuff recently on using fairly standard substance abuse treatment approaches for American immigrant populations from various parts of the world. And we don't get nearly enough of that stuff, and I would encourage anybody interested in that kind of work to go for it. There's some more of those on the next slide. Jill? Wake up, Jill.
Trying to unmute myself. It's not going. I'm having another one of my slide won't there we go.
There it is.
I was awake, just for the record. It just wouldn't turn.
Those of you who are familiar with the traditions of social psychiatry and community psychology will know that prevention is a really important concept, also in public health in general. So studies that have important prevention connotations or implications are especially important to us. We get a lot of qualitative stuff. The particular way in which qualitative research is valuable in our part of the world is to the degree that it sheds light on the subjective experience of the members of disenfranchised or underserved populations, because this often provides important clues as to how policy and practice can better reach those underserved populations. We're seeing a smattering of things about radicalization and its relationship to social media and violence. This is a fairly new and exciting area, and authors are finding publication opportunities in a lot of journals, including AJO. We've published a few things on what, for example, school systems can do to minimize or prevent prejudicial processes that could contribute to the radicalization of adolescents and young adults in high school and college. Human trafficking is one of the most rapidly accelerating topics of interest, and we really like to get stuff in this area, but there's not enough of it. Severe mental illness is an older topic. It happens to be my scientific background, and so I'm especially interested in it. But this is one of the most disenfranchised populations in our culture, and there are a lot of policy problems that make it so. So we really like to get stuff that addresses why the hell is it that we know so much about how to treat severe mental illness, but we never do it because those treatments don't ever make it into the mental health system. As you might expect, refugees, war trauma, all things associated with that are very much of interest, and there's a lot of hot stuff going on internationally. And somewhat related to that is the acculturation and assimilation and accommodation of immigrant and refugee populations, which turns out to be a very complicated but socially and psychologically interesting area, and one that has obvious implications for social policy reform. And the two final entries there are just things that stick in my craw because we don't get nearly enough of this stuff. And you look across journals that publish about policy and disability, and you see very little. And the two that strike me the most are children with physical disabilities, all kinds of stuff with social and psychiatric disabilities, very little on the social effects and needed policy for reversing discrimination and stigma for children with physical disabilities. Despite the fact that we've had the American with Disabilities Act for 30 years now, almost 30 years now, children with physical disabilities experience all kinds of prejudice and stigma, and this really needs to change. And also, curiously, we see very little about elderly populations, especially when there's intersectionality involved. Elderly populations are special, and minority populations are special. And we have every reason to believe, especially today in the COVID area, we have every reason to believe that the combinations of those things can be really important and even fatal under certain circumstances. So those are the topics we're looking for, and I want to encourage everybody to focus their efforts in at least one of those areas. Jill?
I think we're at Are we at time? Right? Yeah, we're at time. So we already talked to you a little bit about social innovations, and I encourage you to check that out if that's something you're interested in. If you go to the journal's website, you can search past articles and you can search on keywords. So you can search on social innovations and that'll pull up past social innovations articles. So you can see some examples of what those look like and the types of topics that we have covered on our website. And then this is just another snippet from a social innovations article. So I think I will leave it at that. I don't think I see that we have any questions, but our contact information is on the journal website, should also be in the app. So if you think of any questions later, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thank you for joining us today.